So we are here in the conversation with Bev Hindle, the Executive Director of the Oxford to Cambridge ARC, and Jayne Manley, the CEO of Earth Trust, talking about how we can connect communities in order to champion accessible, natural green spaces for everyone. So please do submit your questions for Jayne or Bev in the chat function. So Bev's going to be interviewing Jayne for about 15 minutes or so, but if there are any questions that you would like to ask or hear either Bev or Jayne talk about, then please do submit them, and we'll have sort of 10 minutes or so towards the end of our half an hour to cover off any questions that haven't yet been discussed. If we don't get time to answer all of your questions, then we'll put them to Jayne and Bev later and send them in our follow-up communications. So we are recording the webinar, so the recording will also be available hopefully before the end of this week, but definitely by early next week. And we'll also be sharing a very short survey in our post-event communication. So do let us know if you have enjoyed today and you think you'd like to hear more of this kind of discussion in the future. This is our strategy. If you haven't already had a look at it, please do go and visit earthtrust.org.uk/about strategy, and that's where you can read all about our plans for the future. But those are the plans that Bev and Jayne are going to be bringing to life a little bit more in this discussion. So without further ado, I will hand over to Bev. And Bev, just before you kick us off, a little sort of scene setting question from me. It would be great to hear a little bit about why you feel the issues that we're here to talk about today are so important and how they connect to your sort of experiences to date.
Thank you very much, Verity, and good morning, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bev Hindle. I'm the Executive Director of the Oxford to Cambridge ARC. I've been working with Jayne in my days of Oxfordshire and in the ARC for some time, and always impressed with the work the Earth Trust is doing. And in particular, I'm very impressed with the strategy. I'm really pleased to be here talking about it today. In terms of, Verity asked me to share some thoughts on my own experiences around the issue of championing accessible natural green space. I mean, at a personal level, I think most of us felt during COVID and even before then how important it was that we get back and we have had this access to nature, making sure that humans are seen as part of nature in a positive and proactive way. But what I've seen at scale and what I've seen regionally is this is not unique to any one geography. This is a challenge for all of us. I think we have a real opportunity to build on that sort of local experience and take that to a regional level. I know we're going to talk to Jayne about that today. But on a personal level, I think these last few years have taught us, and each of us, and that connectedness that Jayne and the Earth Trust talk a lot about, we felt that. We felt that return to how we need to be connected to for our mental health well-being, for our physical well-being, for our economic well-being. These things are all linked, and certainly something that we'll be exploring over the next little while. Jayne, I'm going to bring Jayne in now. Jayne, to introduce yourself, Chief Executive of Earth Trust. Jayne, say a little bit about yourself and perhaps, again, how you fit in this conversation and your own experiences before we get into the actual questions.
Yeah, thank you, Bev, and welcome to everybody who's listening to this conversation. I mean, I suppose the traditional answer is to explain how many years I've worked in the environmental sector and the variety of roles I've had. But I wanted just to explain where my passion comes from for connecting people with the environment in a very different way. I was born and grew up in the West Midlands, in the Midlands, not actually that far from where the Commonwealth Games have been held. And I grew up probably getting a connection with the environment through our backyard, whether it was the hedgehogs that were scurrying through the back garden is probably too much of a title to give the backyard, whether it was the birds, whether it was the butterflies that inhabited the buddleia bush. It wasn't, I didn't have access to green spaces in the way the Earth Trust talks about them. But I developed during my childhood a real thirst for understanding about the ecology and what makes humans and the environment tick. And that's really what's driven me to enable more people from everywhere in the UK to actually develop a connection and benefit from that connection. And in so doing, the environment benefits as well.
Jayne, that's fantastic. And I should have said first off, congratulations on the 40th anniversary for the Earth Trust, but also the launch of the 2022-2027 strategy, which is obviously what we're going to focus on today. I think to kick us off, it'd be really great if you could tell us a little bit about this strategy and in particular, what's changed and why.
Yes, I think when you introduced the strategy, Bev, you did a fabulous job of indicating that a lot has changed during COVID and it's still changing. I think we tend to focus on COVID because we saw huge numbers of people wanting to access and needing to access green space. What we have been doing, this is our 40th anniversary, and what the Trust has been doing in its first 40 years is doing local stuff really well. We demonstrate engagement, we demonstrate management of the green spaces in our care really well, but that's not enough. And we learned during COVID, it's not enough for individual organisations to care for green spaces. We need to share that more. We need to empower communities to care for their own green spaces and to put green spaces in where they are not. Because the other thing we learned during COVID was that people need local access to green space and they need to be able to engage with that green space in a way they probably haven't before. And I just want to flag, we're in an economic crisis now. And the learning that we had during COVID, we need to remember that throughout this crisis. We learned that it was the most disadvantaged in our community who didn't have access to green space and whose health and well-being suffered as a result. And what we need to do is to be thinking about that and acting on that. So in terms of the shifts in the strategy, we have done some amazing things locally on our green spaces and in association with others. We really do need to up our game and we need to be working with others. We need to be working with communities. We need to be developing new partnerships. We need to be taking that learning and demonstration on our green spaces and magnifying that wherever we can, but we're going to need some help.
Really interesting, Jayne, hearing that answer, you talk the language of need really comes across. This idea that the environment is nice to have, it's a lovely thing, it's an attractive, beautiful thing, of course it is, but this idea that there's more of an intrinsic, deeper need, I think is what people are starting to come to, and but not necessarily understanding how to make that happen and how to make that work. The mission reads as being very proactive. It talks about very determinate, being a very determined strategy, specifically focusing on more direct engagement, as you say, and getting more people involved in action. I guess, given the big issues you're tackling in the strategy, presumably this is aimed at not just raising awareness, which is important and communication is important, but the need for urgency and that commitment to act. So it's all good talking about it, which is a start, but actually doing something. And I know if anybody who does take that link that Verity talked about earlier, you'll see some fantastic video in the Earth Trust website where there's some really interesting people talking about the fact that this action. And I think, Jayne, it'd be good to hear more about what you think about that.
Yeah, so looking at our main drivers, I suppose, we demonstrate access to green space, we demonstrate quality engagement and also quality management of green spaces. And we also have a variety of green spaces in our care at a variety of scales, some within communities and some in countryside settings. And that variety of demonstration is what we need to hold on to and share that. So the action needs to be around engaging with more people and different communities, but on those communities' terms, if I can put it like that. So what we mustn't do is to think that there's a blueprint that we can apply to engaging communities, because it doesn't work like that. Communities respond based on their backgrounds, their needs, their ambitions, their challenges, their barriers. And we need to be really mindful of that and develop programs with them, for them, that enable that greater connectivity. We also need to be making sure that we are amplifying what we're doing and taking it onto different stages and having confidence to do that, to build the networks to have confidence to do that. And those sometimes will be local, but sometimes what we're doing is really relevant regionally. And we have some programs that are also relevant and impactful nationally that other people could learn from. And we want to share. So it's finding those spaces, those places where we can, within the resources we've got, take that learning and share it.
Jayne, I want to pick up that network piece. Who's the audience for this strategy? Okay, so look, we talked beforehand. It's a lovely looking document. It reads well. Visually, it's impressive. But how do we get people, and who are those people who need to read this, who need to take heart in it, and actually need to own it? And I'm thinking, is it government? Is it local? Is it national? Or is it local landowners? Is it organizations, or all of the above? Anything you want to share on who you think this is targeted
so
at?
whether it's what we're demonstrating, whether it's engaging with communities in an impactful way, whether it's influencing, each of those segments of a cross-cutting strategy will have its own audience. So what we do when we are working with a local community in an urban setting, engaging them in the natural world through their parks, through gardens, through their local green spaces, that's very different from trying to influence an MP or trying to influence and work with Natural England. So everything we do, we will have to be very mindful of the different audiences that we need to engage with. But we also want we want people to come to us as well as us reaching out to others, because our resources are limited. And back to what I said earlier, in order to make this really work, we've got to be growing communities. Those communities have to be enabling change. We call them becoming change makers for the future, environmental and social change makers for the future. And we want to be a part of that. We think we have a lot to offer. We know we have a lot to offer. We've got a history of offering. Now we're moving into a different phase as an organization.
Jayne, you picked up something there that I just want to follow on as a segue. This change or this transformation. I mean, for me, reading this, I've written lots of strategies. I've read way too many strategies. This one does feel different. It feels like it truly can be transformative. Tell us what you think is indicative, or what is inherent in your approach that you've set out in the strategy that actually will make sure that this is a successful transformation. What do you need to make sure this is a successful transformation?
One of the things I'd like to say before I answer that is I think what makes this strategy very different is that it's based on passion and vision and real values, which we share as an organization and which we would like to share with others. So those people who share our values and our passion, we want to work with them. So what makes this different is that transformation. So our ambition is that everybody in the UK will have access to green space, and we'll be thinking very differently about the provision of that green space, where it is, how accessible it is, how engaging those green spaces are, and take that learning. We are not, as an organisation, going to be able to put all those green spaces in place. Goodness, I wish I had the resource in this organisation to enable that. So the way we will be working will be influencing others so that their resources are more mindful of people's needs, more mindful of those green spaces. We've got a programme that we talked earlier in the year about, which was building nature into people's lives and thinking differently and acting differently about what nature and where, and not putting people in one box and communities in one box and nature over here in another box, but building them together so that people and nature thrive in balance. Because one thing's for certain, we can have fabulous nature to the detriment of human well-being, and we can have fantastic human well-being to the detriment of the environment. And we're in the middle of a number of crises, whether it's the biodiversity crises, whether it's climate change, and the fact that we have to be acting very differently as a society and understanding the difference we can make at home, we can make in our lives, we can make as we go about our working lives. I think when people think about making change, they think about their recycling at home, and that that might be what they think is the limit of their ability to make real change happen. They then go into work, and maybe they don't realize how powerful they are in a work situation. They are making decisions day to day about the future of people and the environment. And we need to enable people, help people understand how important those day-to-day decisions are, and how those small decisions, they might think they're small, I think they're probably mega, but how those small decisions actually build up over time. I would like to say something about societal change. Societal change really happens when there is momentum behind that change, where more people understand and buy into that change that needs to happen, and make decisions to buy into that change and do it for themselves. So the more people buy into that change, understand, appreciate and act, the more we're likely to be achieving net zero targets, for instance, or biodiversity net gain targets. The more people tend not to respond to targets really well, do they? Because it does tend to come across as a, you will do this. We need to convert from the you will do this doom and gloom scenario to the we're all in this together. And by making small changes, whether we're at home or whether we're at work, we will be able to achieve what we need to achieve to save this planet.
Jayne, I mean, I've got one more question, but you've kind of answered part of it. So I want to get to the heart of the question, really. Strategies are lovely, and doing the right thing is obviously great, but it's not easy. You've got challenges, you know, whether it be resources, whether it be political, personal attention spans being very short right now. I mean, you talked about the crises that we have. It's very difficult to talk about a 5-year plan when people are really fearing what's potentially coming, you know, literally this autumn. So what do you need, particularly from not just the people on this call, but from partners, from stakeholders, from the people that you want to share this strategy? What do you need from them to be part of this strategy taking forward, and to share the expectation of success, and how to make sure that that success is actually achieved?
So to make sure that this is successful, we need people's input, but we need more than that. We need their energy. We need them to be thinking creatively and acting creatively throughout. We're very good at parceling things up and dealing with them in these parcels, and not seeing the overlaps between things and the overlaps between decisions. So whether it's, I don't know, building a new housing development and not thinking about how communities can move around more sustainably in future, whether it's putting nature in a box, oh, it's all right, we've got a pond and some wildflower meadow over there, that's fine, we've done our nature bit. You know, we need to be thinking integrated and acting in an integrated way, whether it's transport, whether it's recycling, whether it's building nature in, whether it's, I know we talk about nature-based solutions, don't we? And demonstrating nature-based solutions. And I think most people think a nature-based solution is something like a river of life, which is a fantastic transformational initiative that really establishes a living, working wetland ecosystem on the banks of the Thames. I think most people think that scale, but we can all do nature-based solutions in housing developments and in building developments. So the sustainable urban drainage systems that people are designing are actually mini nature-based solutions.
Yes.
But so we need to be learning from ecosystems and translating that, and where people don't know, they reach out and ask. One of the things that's absolutely certain is we don't have all the answers. I'm afraid. I wish I had all the answers. We don't. But it's flagging up that we don't have all the answers and making sure that we're working together to try and find a sustainable solution.
Jayne, that's excellent, and Verity, I see there's a few questions there coming from the audience. It'd be really great to cover those off. Maybe in the wrap up, we'll pick up a few of the main thoughts that have come out of here, Jayne. But I really appreciate the conversation.
Yeah.
Verity, do you want to pick us up from there?
Yeah, sure. So I think we had a question that actually connects really nicely to what you were saying, Jayne, about those people's sphere of influence and power, and how sometimes you don't necessarily recognize that. And I think this question is particularly in light of the economic challenges that we're all about to face. So that we have a question about, with a financial crisis on the immediate horizon, what low-cost options might there be for local communities to still improve the quality and quantity of their green spaces? And I guess that's also a question about, how can we still make nature-based solutions and accessible green spaces a priority where people are having to really make some difficult decisions at the moment?
One of the things we can be thinking about when we're building nature into people's lives is that connectivity, and how people, with the time that they have available, can support those green spaces at the same time as being better connected. So we label it as volunteering, don't we? We say and encourage volunteering, but actually that volunteering does so much more. By volunteering to care for a local green space in whatever time that's available, one of the things that's happening during that volunteering is that we're building, as a result of being part of a volunteer group, you're building social capital, you're building social connections, which make those communities more resilient. But at the same time, that engagement with the natural world means that you're becoming, as a volunteer, you're becoming more connected to it. You're more understanding of the role that people play, human beings play within the whole ecosystem, and moving from thinking that nature ecosystems are in one place and human ecosystems are in another. We're beginning to bring those ecosystems together so that they're mutually supportive. So a low-cost solution is, we need to make sure that there are green spaces, there are opportunities for green spaces within communities close to where people live and work. That's an absolute must. We can't always be expecting people to travel long distances to access green spaces. But we also need to be thinking very differently and creatively about how those green spaces are managed. And the more we embrace communities in that thinking and in that management, the more we are likely to be building both a community and a successful ecosystem, nature ecosystem.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple more questions. They may be slightly related, so I'll ask both of them, and then you can sort of take them as you wish. So one question is about partnership and how important are private sector partnerships to the success of the strategy and overall, I guess, to champion accessible natural green spaces. And then the second question is, who's missing from the conversation currently, broadly speaking, and how can we reach some of those missing voices?
Private partnerships are so important, but it's very much about cross-sector partnerships. So I think that we need to find a way and spaces and places and enable broader, more creative conversations to happen. And not put private partnerships in a box marked private partnerships and nature-based partnerships in a box marked nature-based partnerships, but to bring them together and to work on where are the private partnerships, where are the opportunities for those private partnerships. And one of the things that Building Nature In has taught us is that a lot of partnerships for nature come on the back of, I think, I would identify two different partnership groups: planning, development, design, construction of places where people live, rather than design, construction of green spaces. So those sorts of partnerships that are very active in Oxfordshire. We're in an area of high growth and development in Oxfordshire. So this puts us in a prime place to be reaching out to those partners. And then a very different set of partners, I'd say, are around land management partners, farmers, foresters. We need, as a trust, we're farmers and foresters, as well as being an organisation that cares for green spaces. We don't put them in different boxes. We are one. So making sure that we're expanding those partnerships as well, and bringing those partnerships together with the planning, development, design partnerships. What's missing? That's a really difficult question, Verity. So until we start working in this way, we won't know what's missing. But one of the things we do absolutely need to know, and we need people to tell us, is where they feel they're not being heard and they're not part of the conversation and part of the action that needs to happen. So we need to, as a trust, we also need to put the onus back on those communities. If they feel that there's a barrier to that engagement, we want them to say so that we can address that barrier.
Great, thank you. So we're rapidly heading towards the end of our time, but we have one last question, which I think is a really key one to ask. So, and I guess either Jayne and Bev, both of you, if you want to comment on this, what role do you think the emerging local nature recovery strategies can play in increasing green space and people's access to it? Bev, do you have any comments on that we might want to start with you?
Oh, very, very quickly, because we want to hear Jayne to wrap us up. I think local nature recoveries are right at the heart of this, because I think, as Jayne was just saying, where communities can be involved in improving nature for its own sake, but to be involved so that human element is intrinsically involved, I think you're going to gain that access and that ownership of nature in a community sense. And I think you're absolutely right, Jayne. There is an engaging and a continuing push for communities to own this. I think that's absolutely fundamental, and I think that's at the heart of nature recovery. The only other thing I wanted to add, Jayne, before you answer your part of this question, a couple of key things really came through in your conversation today. Integration was the one that really struck out to me. Those networks of people, whether they be private sector, public sector, need to be thinking, rather than connectedness in a transport sense or connectedness in an infrastructure sense, or not, these things are all connected, and the ability to find those natural solutions as part of those are where I think people like Earth Trust need to be at the table. You don't want to be there retrofitting it afterwards. You do not want to be coming and picking up the mistake later. That integration is pretty fundamental to me. But Jayne, please, and from a personal thank you for today, and very, very, very pleased to be part of this conversation.
So I think nature recovery strategies are vital. I am going to be a bit controversial, though, in that they are called nature recovery strategies, and they are lines on maps, or they tend to convert into lines on maps. And human connectiveness with the environment doesn't really respond to a line on a map or a demarcation, because we have to be thinking differently, as I've been saying, about where that nature is and how people connect to it. And they're very different things. Having nature in a location is not the same as people connecting with it and engaging with it and benefiting from it and learning about themselves in that environment, and then going away and doing something for the whole of the planet. So I think the essence of nature recovery strategies is really good. I wish they weren't called nature recovery strategies, because there's no human or social wording in there. It's nature recovery strategy. And I think as we work with communities, we need to think about their needs and what's going to work for them, and not necessarily think we are going to give you nature and you are going to like it, because that won't work. We need to be building that nature into where people live and work. We need to be building that nature into people's lives in a very relevant, meaningful way, and using words that are going to empower and enable them, and for them want to be involved.
Thanks, Jayne. Great closing words, I guess. So I think we're at the end of our time, and I was going to ask for, sort of anything that Bev or Jayne, you felt you hadn't been able to say, but I think that feels like a nice place to wrap up. So thanks so much, Bev, for your, great questions and your willingness to be part of our conversation today. And Jayne, thank you also. And then thank you too for all of those who have attended and the questions that we've received. So please do give us your feedback, or send us any questions that you feel weren't answered. Sort of get in touch with us. We're very happy to pick up conversations offline, or maybe think about having another follow-up session later on. So thank you, everybody. And have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you, Bev. Thank you, Verity. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye.